Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our next lesson. It is over Course 2, Lesson 3.1, and Course 3, Lesson 2.2. This is the 7th grade lesson and the 8th grade lesson over multiplying and dividing fractions. As always, please have out 4 things. Have out your Springboard book, your composition book to take the notes, a pencil, and a highlighter. The highlighters, if you've got any questions, so you can circle the part that's confusing to you in the notes, and you'll be prepared to ask any questions of your teacher when the lesson's over. Okay, the learning targets for today are to solve problems involving multiplying and dividing fractions and to estimate with fractions. This lesson is review again, but we do want you to go ahead and have this in your notes as reference. Okay, so write this down here, the multiplying rules over to the left-hand side of your Cornell note format. The first rule is you must have only numerators and denominators. In other words, whole numbers, anything with the mixed number, is a no. You're getting rid of them. You're changing them to improper fractions. Okay? After you have that done, you simplify numerator with denominator, just like simplifying a fraction. The third step is to multiply numerator by numerator. Fourth step is multiply denominator by denominator. And step 5 is to make sure that your final answer is in simplest form. Okay, make sure you've got all of that written down in your journal. In the next slide, we're going to do a couple examples together. Okay, so multiplying examples. Our first example is going to be 1 and 4/9 times the whole number 9. Well, the first rule of multiplying is that you must have no whole numbers. So I'm going to go ahead and change the first fraction here to an improper fraction by multiplying the denominator times the whole number. So 9 times 1 is 9, and then I'm going to add the numerator. So I had 9 plus 3 is 13 over 9. And then if I look at my second fraction here, it is a whole number. So what I do for any whole number is I change 9, whatever the whole number is, I divide it by 1, because 9 divided by 1 is the equivalent to 9. Okay? Now rule number 1's done. Next step is to see if I can cross-simplify anything. So if I'm looking at my numerators and denominators, 13, let's look at the numerator. 13 doesn't have any factors in common with 9. I can't reduce this fraction, but then the question is, can 13 simplify with 1? And the answer is no. 1 goes into 13, but 13 wouldn't change at all. But what about our other numerator, 9? Well, 9 and 1 can't simplify because it won't change the value of it, but this 9 and 9 can, because 9 divided by 9 is 1, and 9 divided by 9 is 1. Okay, so when we go to multiply across here, all I've got left is 13 times 1 is 13. And then for my denominator, I have 1 denominator times denominator is 1. Okay, then the last step was to see if you can simplify if possible, and that's the whole number 13. Okay, to see if our answer is kind of in the ballpark as far as estimating, because that was one of our learning targets, this first fraction, I'm going to draw a little cloud here because that's kind of my clue that I was estimating. My first fraction, 1 and 4/9, since half of 9 is 4 1/2, that's really close to 1 1/2. Okay, so I can say 1, or I could have said 2. And then my second fraction was 9. So if I take 1 times 9, that equals 9, and that was my second number. 2 times 9 is 18, and I know, estimating-wise, that my answer has to be between 9 and 18. And then did our exact answer when we computed, is 13 between 9 and 18? Yes. Then that's definitely a reasonable answer. Okay? So here's example 2. Example 2 is 3/4 times 1 and 5/12. So step 1 is no whole numbers. The first fraction here, 3/4, doesn't have any whole numbers, so we're already ready to go on that. But the second fraction, again, I've got to change it to an improper fraction. 12 times 1 is 12. Then I'm going to add the numerator 5, so 12 plus 5 is 17 over 12. There we go. Okay, next is to see if I can simplify either numerator with any denominator. So let's look at that. So 3 and 4 won't simplify, but does 3 simplify with this denominator? And the answer is yes. 3 goes into 3 once, 3 goes into 12 4 times. Okay? And then if I look at my other numerator, 17, 17 is prime, so I know the only thing that will simplify with 17 is 17, and neither of my denominators here are 17, so I'm done simplifying now. Next step was to multiply across. So I'm going to take 1 times 17, and I get 17, and then I will take 4 times 4, which is 16. Okay, so we did numerator times numerator to get 17 and denominator times denominator to get 16, and then simplify if possible. This is an improper fraction here, so if I look at this over to the side, I'm writing the division problem like we talked about the other day. 17 is the numerator, so the numerator goes in. That's the number that's being divided. And the denominator, which was 16, that's the number that's on the outside of the division sign, okay? Just for clarification. So 16 goes into 17 one whole time, and then you will have, when you subtract, you've got 1 left over. So right here, I'm going to color code this. I've got 1 is my whole number. That's my whole number. I've got my leftover, my remainder, will always be my numerator in my fraction. And then whatever number I was dividing by, notice 16 in my original fraction, that was my denominator to begin with. It's still going to be my denominator in my fraction. Okay? So there we go. Our final answer is 1 1/16. Okay? So moving on to the next slide for dividing. The dividing rules, the first one is you must have only numerators and denominators. The second is that you multiply by the reciprocal. And what we mean by that is, you may have heard keep, change, flip. Okay, that's another little, not shortcut, but something to help you remember that step. To multiply by the reciprocal, you keep the first fraction the same, you change the sign from dividing to multiply, and then you flip the second fraction. Then right here, I want you to notice, this is the same, these rules right here are the same as multiplying. So in other words, next step could have been just multiply, because we changed it from dividing to multiplication. Okay, and again, I want you to notice this first step. Go ahead and write down again, whole numbers are no. We've got to change all whole numbers to improper fraction. Okay, just like we did with multiplying. Okay, so one more thing I want you to write down here is reciprocal. Write that over to the left of your line. Reciprocal. And this is the inverse of a fraction. The inverse of a fraction. Okay, so an example, write it over to the left again. A couple examples is if I have the fraction 2/3, and if I needed to find the reciprocal of it, I would flip it, okay? And when I flip it, the inverse, or the reciprocal, would be 3/2, or 3/2. And again, if I had the fraction, let's say, if I had the fraction 1 2/3, well, I can't flip it. I always think of the whole number kind of like an anchor. I would need to go ahead and make it an improper fraction. Okay, notice that is the first step, is only whole numbers and denominators. So I'd have 3 plus 2 So that would equal 5/3. And then the reciprocal of 5/3, again, flip it, is 3/5. So those would be the reciprocals, okay? It's also known as the flip. The reciprocal is also known as the flip, okay? So next slide is going to be a couple examples for dividing. Alrighty, our first example for dividing is 5 divided by 3/5. Okay, rule number 1 was no whole number, so again, our whole number here of 5, I just put 5/1, and I've now made it into a numerator and denominator. I'm not changing the sign yet. I'm still on step 1, no whole numbers. Okay, now step 2 was to keep, let's multiply by the reciprocal, then we change, then we flip. And we write it in that order, we say it in that order for a reason. Because here we keep this first fraction, 5/1. We change from dividing to multiplying, and then this last fraction here, we actually flip it. Instead of 3/5, it is now 5/3. Now we have a multiplication problem, and now we should be able to rock and roll because we just did a couple examples there. So I'm going to check to see if I can simplify anything. My 5 does not simplify with 1, and that 5 does not simplify with 3. Well, if that 5 didn't simplify, then the other numerator 5 is not going to simplify either. So we're ready to multiply numerator times numerator. So 5 times 5 is 25. Denominator times denominator, 1 times 3 is 3. I need to change that again to an improper fraction. I'm sorry, that is an improper fraction. I need to change it to a mixed number. So I'm going to put 25 divided by 3. 3 goes into 25 8 times, and that was 24 with 1 left over. So again, color coding. 8 is my whole number. 3 went in there 8 whole times. Here's my numerator 1. And I'm writing that over whatever I had been dividing by, and I had been dividing by 3, so I will still have my 3. So my final answer is 8 1/3. Okay? Example 2 is 7 1/3 divided by 4. Again, rule number 1, no whole numbers. So I've got 21 plus 1 is 22/3 divided by, in my whole number 4, I'm going to put it as 4/1. So, keep, change, flip. I'm going to keep my first number the same as 22/3. I'm going to change from divide to multiply, and then this last fraction I am flipping to be 1/4. Okay? Can we simplify anything? Let's look. 22 does not simplify with 3. 3 does not go into 22. Okay, and that's the only thing that goes into 3 is 3. And 4. Well, both of those numbers are even, so 2 goes into both of them. So 2 goes into 22 11 times, and 2 goes into 4 2 times. Okay, we just simplified those numbers. And the number 1, I can't ever simplify with anything else. So we are ready to multiply numerator times numerator, which is 11 times 1 is 11, and 3 times 2 is 6. Let's do our division problem. 6 goes into 11 once, with 5 left over. So our final answer is 1 and 5 6. Okay, the final answer is 1 and 5 6. That concludes today's lesson over multiplying and dividing with fractions. If you will please draw a line here, I want you to write a summary of 2 to 3 sentences over the lesson of the day. And if you have any questions, please be prepared to ask your teacher when the lesson's over. Thank you and have a great day.